Welcome this evening to the Literacy Research Center and Clinic's Fall Literacy Conference. It's my pleasure to be here to welcome you this evening. My name is Reutzel. I'm Dean of the College of Education at the University of Wyoming, and have the pleasure of serving with the people in the Literacy Research Center and Clinic, who are fantastic literacy people. If you haven't gotten to know them yet, please get to know them. We have some tremendous faculty here in literacy, and so by all means, get to know them. They have a lot to give you. So let's see if this thing works. There we go. This evening, we have a new faculty member at the University of Wyoming. She came to us just this last spring, and Dr. Lee Hall. Lee, are you here? There she is, in the back. And Lee came to us from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. She had been there for 12 years as a faculty member. We somehow managed to snooker her away into a Wyoming Excellence Chair, endowed chair position here at the University of Wyoming in adolescent literacy. Lee's a former elementary and middle school teacher. She has published in a number of really fine journals that you might have heard of, like Harvard Ed Review, Teachers College Record, the Journal of Literacy Research. Any of you know about some of these? Yes, those are some of the finest journals in the field. And she's written a number of books. She is the recipient of the Literacy Research Association's Edward B. Fry Book Award. She also received the Outstanding Dissertation Award from the International Reading Association when she graduated. She is a Spartan at heart, I think, a little, until she got here to the Cowboys. Now she's teaching. But she got her PhD at Michigan State University, and she has an amazing skill set, not only in adolescent literacy and how to help struggling adolescent students, but she also has an amazing skill set in digital literacies. She writes a blog. Some of you might want to look it up. She has some really great things to say, has some really interesting thoughts. But I would like for you, because we are so lucky to have her at the University of Wyoming, to welcome Dr. Lee Hall to the University of Wyoming. Would you like to say anything, Lee?
No, I'm good.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for coming this evening. The theme of the conference is Sharpening Our Focus, Comprehension Across Disciplines and Grade Levels. I think this is a great focus for this conference, and it's a great focus given the time we live in, where text has become increasingly important. We're surrounded by it, we're saturated with it, whether it's typical text, traditionally printed, or it's digitally presented. So, got that nasty back there. I thought I'd quote a little bit from a book that I liked a lot. Dr. P. David Pearson wrote the foreword for it, and this is shameless self-promotion. I just have to admit it. But this is one of my recent books, Young Meaning Makers Teaching Comprehension in Grades K-2, published at Teachers College Press. It starts out like this: reading comprehension is indisputably the ultimate objective of reading instruction and constitutes the very essence of the act of reading. And I quote one of my favorite people who's no longer in my circle of professional associations, but Dolores Durkin. She was an amazing researcher and educator. And of course, you'll see there that Dr. P. David Pearson's name is in the string of pearls there. Although discrepancies exist among educators and researchers concerning definitions, processes, goals, and the methods for teaching reading comprehension in school classrooms, virtually all would agree, without hesitation, that reading comprehension skills are essential to thrive in a world saturated with traditional and digital print. So let's see how your comprehension is tonight, all right? So how are we doing? Could you read this? Tell me, what do you comprehend from that one? Diana was still alive before she died. Makes you wonder how somebody gets out of journalism school or something like that. Or how about this one? When I grow up, I want to be like Mommy. Now, if you can't see that real well, there's some people there with holding money out. Looks a little risque, but the truth of the matter is it is not at all. Here's the explanation from the mother. Dear Mrs. Jones, I wish to clarify that I am not now, nor have I ever been, an exotic dancer. I work at Home Depot and told my daughter how hectic it was last week before the blizzard hit. I told her we sold out of every single snow shovel we had, and then I found one more in the back room, and that several people were fighting over who would get it. Her picture doesn't show me dancing around a pole. It's supposed to depict me selling the last snow shovel we had at Home Depot. So from now on, I will remember to check her homework more thoroughly before she turns it in. Or how about this one? This was a third grader that I picked up a story from some years ago. It's about horses. As you can see, little spelling problem couldn't possibly lead to any comprehension issues. Let's try this one out. I like horse. I have other horse friends. Horse like carrots. Who'd have known it? You wouldn't think they could, but they can put their legs straight up. Horse make you feel good. My dad wants a horse, but my mom says no. When I am 16 or 20, I will buy my own horse. I'm sure that poor mother was in a real twist after reading that. Now, all of you from being from Wyoming country, you love horse, right? Or at least horses. Well, here's another one of my favorites. See if this comprehension dilemma hits you anywhere. Jake's 5 and he's learning to read. He points at a picture in a zoo book and says, "Look, Mama, it's a frickin' elephant." Deep breath. What did you call it? It's a frickin' elephant, Mama. It says so in the picture. And so it does. Come on, work on a little here. Your phonics may be weak if you can't get that frickin' elephant out. So, my hope is, a little prior knowledge should help too. Again, I welcome you. Hope that you have a wonderful conference here. You're going to hear some of the finest minds and some of the finest speakers in the world of literacy. And the scholars that you have here speaking to you today are among the finest, if not the finest in the nation. And we are very fortunate to have them. So welcome to the conference, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
The audience after you, because you did a good job, so I'll do my best. Welcome. Thank you. So let me introduce, and it's my pleasure to introduce our guest who arrived to Laramie, Wyoming, not the first time, Dr. David. Welcome to Wyoming. So let me start with this, that Dr. David started his career as a teacher, as an elementary teacher. And then when he saw that children, not all, but some children couldn't read, he decided to do some research on why children couldn't read. And he decided to take graduate classes, like we did when we found the problem. So when he decided to go to grad school, Dr. David was the first PhD student of Dr. John Manning. Yeah, and you probably enjoyed working with him, and we saw a lot of nice work. So I learned today that Dr. David is newly retired faculty from University of California. And it was my pleasure to see Dr. David also at the ERA conference, where he was a speaker and also presenting his work. You probably have in bio about Dr. David. I'm not going to read too much, but I learned also today from his colleagues and his friends that Dr. David is a good negotiator. So he's not smoking anymore, but he used to smoke. And then he told his colleagues that they shouldn't tell anyone about it. So he tried to sneak smoking. So please welcome Dr. David. I'm not going to talk too much. And you can tell me more.
deal I made with the devil was really with Taffy Raphael, your speaker in the morning. She was my graduate assistant. We shared an office. She had a dog I didn't like, and she didn't like my smoking. So the deal I made with her is that if you don't tell anybody else that I'm sneaking cigarettes, I'll let you keep the dog in the office. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. And I do have a confession to make. When I started off getting ready for this talk several months ago, when Cindy talked to me, the title of it was Reading, Writing, and Language, Tools or Goals. But this is the title that made a lot of sense to me when I agreed to do this talk. But on the way to Wyoming, the talk transformed itself. It took on a new title. It's called Reading Comprehension, Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow. And I think the reason it did that is that I started thinking about the title. I'm still going to talk about it. I'm still going to talk about whether we should regard reading comprehension skills as tools or goals. But I'm going to talk about it in a broader context, and the context represents the journey that we have taken over the last 30 or 40 years in trying to understand how reading comprehension works and how we can better help kids acquire it. And the reason I wanted to do that is that it seems to me that the journey has been worth the effort, and that we've learned a lot of interesting things. So we're going to talk a little bit about yesterday, a little bit about today, and a little bit about tomorrow. The plan for yesterday is to revisit the past 5 decades, panning for nuggets of wisdom that are worth remembering. I came up with 5 that I think are really worth remembering and worth continuing to implement in our schools. Today's part is to look at the problems and possibilities in today's world of teaching reading comprehension, which means we're going to have to deal with the issue of more complex standards and more complex and higher expectations for what kids are able to do in our schools. And for the tomorrow part, I want to preview the problems and solutions that I think lie just around the corner. The things that we as a society must do if we want to bring the promise of literacy and the possibilities that those afford kids for a better life to any kind of reality. These slides will be available at a brand new website now that I'm retired. The university no longer hosts me very much, so I've got a new website. It's pdavidpearson.org, easy to remember. But before I do that, when I give talks with teachers, I always like to take a little survey of who's in the crowd. Elementary, raise your hand. Secondary, raise your hand. College, raise your hand. Yeah, well, you all know the difference between elementary, secondary, and college teachers, don't you, right? We know that elementary teachers love what? Their kids, right, yeah. And we know that secondary teachers love what? Their subject, yeah. And we know that college teachers love what? Themselves. Yeah, and if you don't believe me, you can come to a faculty meeting sometime at Berkeley. You'll see more narcissism than just about anywhere else in America. Yeah. Yesterday, don't you love this picture? This could have been mine, junior high school faculty in 1952. My disclaimer about my nuggets from yesterday, this is my list. When I started making this list and I started sharing it with friends, people would say, well, yeah, but, and they wanted to get their favorite nugget on the list, usually something that they were responsible for and the like. So I have to say this is my list, I own it, and I'm going to deal with it. Okay. So the first nugget is this. It's this understanding this relationship between comprehension and knowledge. The original understanding that I came to when I started reading the literature that came out of the cognitive revolution in the late 60s and early 70s was that we understand what's new in terms of what we already know. But that was just the start of it. Because what we really have learned over the last 30 years or so is that knowledge begets comprehension. That is, you understand what you read in terms of what you already know. But that's just the start of it. Once you've understood something, you actually can learn something. There's new stuff in books, and you can gain new knowledge. So, and if you gain new knowledge, what are you going to do with it? You're going to put it back inside your head. And then what's it available for? It's available for the next cycle of comprehension you go through. So knowledge begets learning, begets Knowledge begets comprehension, begets learning, begets knowledge, begets comprehension. And this in contrast to what we're usually dealing with in education, which are these vicious cycles of, bad performance leads to bad attitudes, and bad attitudes leads to bad performance, and so forth and so on. This is a virtuous cycle. Knowledge is a good commodity to have in our schools. But it comes with a few clicks and clunks. And those clicks and clunks really are all around figuring out what makes sense to us. Now, when you're reading along, and it's going real smoothly, and you're not running into any problems, and everything's making sense to you, right? That's what I call it Nike reading. You just do it. You're on automatic pilot, and everything's going swimmingly. And when does this happen to us? It happens to us when we read the morning newspaper, when we're reading novels on topics that we like, and things like that. But, and there's not much to it. And by the way, there's not a lot of strategic reading going on at all. Because usually when things are going well, you're not being very strategic as a reader, you're just doing it, right? But every once in a while you run into what my friend Tom Anderson at the Center for the Study of Reading used to call the clunks of comprehension, where you say, I've been reading for 5 pages and I don't understand the thing I've read, stuff like that. And then you revert to what I like to call Sherlock Holmes reading. It's intentional. You have to invoke strategies for monitoring, and then once you've figured out what's not working, you have to fix it up. And this is where we employ all those strategies that you see in the lists of strategies that people like myself and Michael Presley used to develop, and Taffy has worked on, and the like. And these are the tools you use to compensate for the fact that what's not happening. Your knowledge is not doing the job for you. If your knowledge is strong and it's a topic you know well, it'll sort of propel the whole process. But when it isn't, when you experience those clunks, then you have to go into this intentional, deliberate fix-up mode. How do we know, by the way, if something makes sense? We're always talking about asking kids, does that make sense? Well, how do you figure out what makes sense when you read? To me, there are 2 criteria that are essential. One is, does it jive with what I know to be true about the world? And the second one is, does it jive with what I read in the text so far? Right? And those 2 criteria, those 2 standards, are the standards for coherence that all readers, no matter how good or bad they are, apply to the reading. It's just that the better readers, because they know more and are more strategic when they need to be, apply it better than a lot of the kids who don't do it so well. But the point is that that's how we know what makes sense, and that's what propels this comprehension process. So if the answer to that question is yes, it jives, we have a click, and if it's no, we have a clunk, and that's when we shift gears. Now, strategies was the second big insight for me, and I think for a lot of people. I like to think of strategies as what we haul out in the face of the clunks. And strategies are there to make the clunks go away. It's what we try to do to make sense out of the text when we realize that it doesn't. The third big insight for me, and I actually borrowed these terms, temporary, adjustable, and sturdy, from my friend Taffy Raphael, and I can't remember exactly where you wrote about this, Taffy, but I remember liking those terms when I heard you talk about it, so I appropriated them. Yeah, wood girder, yes. Scaffolding is, we know about it in the physical world, and in pedagogy it's come to be a popular term to describe the things we do to help kids cope with things that they can't quite manage on their own, right? It's very much a Vygotskian principle. It's exactly what goes on in that zone of proximal development, where it's the difference between what you do and what you can do on your own, and what you can do with a little help from your friends, right? With that more knowledgeable other who's there to guide you. And it helps kids do what? Reach beyond our ordinary grasp. I like to think of scaffolding as that thing that enables us to enact a practice, a skill or a strategy, while we're still acquiring it before we have any control or mastery over it. It's filling in that gap. It's like water wings when you're swimming, or it's like, I guess, training wheels on a bicycle. But the beautiful thing about the scaffolding metaphor is that it enables you to get out of the mold of saying that for every complicated thing that kids learn, you got to break it down into small pieces and then learn each of those pieces to some level of mastery and then put it back together. In scaffolding, you can actually engage in the desired behavior, and you can do it because someone's there at your side to help you out when the going gets a little tough. And that, I think, was another really important insight for me about what scaffolding could do for us. And this led me and some others at the Center for the Study of Reading to adopt a model we called it a cognitive apprenticeship. It's really the gradual release of responsibility model. Do you know, of all the things I've ever written, this is the single most cited graphic that I've ever published. I looked it up on Google. It has 32,000 separate citations or uses. And if you add them all together, it's about 185,000 or something like that, where people have appropriated the term. What they've done with it, I wouldn't want to tell my mother about. But they nonetheless cited it. But the idea is that you go from this space of where the kids are doing nothing and you're doing everything, to where the kids are doing it all and you're doing nothing. And gradually you're giving them more and more responsibility for completing the task. And the idea is that what goes on in between along here is less and less scaffolding, right? Yeah, you're doing less and less of that. And the idea, and by the way, one of the things, with any luck, we're always moving toward that end over time, but we always recognize that it never quite works that way. We're always prepared to slide up and down that scale, because, you know, we're going along, we think the kids are really learning it and getting it, and then Friday comes, and then Monday comes, and we try it again and say, what happened to all those kids who had this nailed on Friday? They don't remember any of it. So you have to retreat, move back up that diagonal of the line. Or you move from one story to the next, and they don't get it on the line. So it's really a much more sort of flexible and adaptable notion than I think a lot of people think it is. The fourth big nugget for me over the last 20 or 30 years is engagement. And for this, we owe our friend John Guthrie, who did a wonderful work on engagement for many years at the University of Maryland. What John taught us is that kids read, write better and learn more when they're engaged. And what does it mean to be engaged? Well, to be engaged means they're more motivated, they're more interested, they care more about what's happening in the life. And he's found that there are 5 different aspects of engagement that are really important. Choice and autonomy, interest, self-efficacy, collaboration, and what he calls curricular coherence. Kids need to have choice in what they read, what they write, and how they represent themselves as learners. By the way, for those of you taking notes, I'm not going to wait for you, but this really will be up on the website, and you're free to download it. And I'm retired, see, so I don't have any vested interest in anything proprietary. I am thrilled if and when anyone steals any idea I ever had. So you should feel free to take any of my property, intellectual property, and use it for whatever purposes, you know, virtuous or nefarious that you like. And I'll be happy as a clam for that. But they need choice about what they read, what they write, and also about how they represent themselves as learners. You know, one of the reasons I've always liked portfolio assessment is that kids are engaged in building a representation of who they are as a learner. And I think that regardless of what other assessments we use, we should use portfolios if for no other reason than that. Interest. You know, there's been a lot of studies over the years showing that, other things being equal, kids can read up a couple of grade levels higher on topics of personal interest than they can on topics that they are not interested in. How is that possible? How can text complexity, which we know is this incredibly wonderful variable, be so influenced by something like interest? Well, when you're really interested in something, you're much more inclined to do what? Hang in there with it, even when the going gets tough. When I was a 5th grade teacher in Porterville, California, I had a boy named Michael Rodriguez in my class, and he wanted to read Treasure Island. Well, if you looked at any measure of Michael Rodriguez's decoding or meaning-making ability, 2nd, 3rd grade maybe, but he hung in there with it. It took him most of a semester. But he did, and he read the whole thing, and he could talk with you about it. But it was all driven by his motivation and his interest. It wasn't driven by the skill or strategies that he had. There's an important distinction between personal interest and situational interest. Personal interests are interests that belong to you. Situational interests are interests that arise in a situation. And by the way, one of the biggest jobs of teachers is to promote situational interests and to expose kids to different topics, different books, things like that. And with any luck, those situational interests might become what? Personal interests. And once they become personal interests, then you really got something good going for kids. And that's a powerful motivator too. Self-efficacy. This is where cognition meets affect. This is all about monitoring your reading and your learning. It's also about, more than that though, it's also about being willing to attribute success to effort and not to ability or fate. A lot of kids think, well, I was just born not to be good at math. How many girls have you heard say, well, I've never been good at math and I never will be good at math, and things like that. So we have these sort of attributions to fate or to some misguided conception of ability. And the secret is in getting kids to accept the fact that they can attribute their success to effort. It entails two of the sort of 21st century skills that we talk about: conscientiousness and stamina and persistence, hanging in there and staying with something. But you notice how that's got to interact with what? Interest and motivation, right? Because if you're doing things that are more interesting, you're more likely to show stamina and persistence. And it also is related to a can-do attitude. I can do this. Maybe with a little help from my friends, but I can still do it. Collaboration. How can collaboration be related to engagement? Well, what do you get out of collaboration? First thing you get is more knowledge. 2 heads are better than 1. Are 3 heads better than 2? This can't go on forever because at some point you've got a committee. And we all know that committees aren't any good at anything. More skills, complementarity. If there are 3 of us at the table, we increase the likelihood that amongst the 3 of us we might know someone who actually knows how to do this addition problem or whatever it might be. And thirdly, it's more fun. I don't know about you, but other things being equal, I prefer to do things with other people than on my own. Okay? Curricular coherence. Things that make sense are easier to tackle, easier to monitor, and more satisfying to complete. And what does it mean for a curriculum to be coherent? It means that it has to rely on some connection with students' existing knowledge, and it has to help them build new knowledge. But in building new knowledge, you're always going to build a bridge between the old and the new. So often, we have curricula where everything's new and there's no old friends in it. And one of the most effective ways to make a piece of informational writing more comprehensible to a group of kids is not to reduce the readability level, but to increase the presence of analogies, metaphors, allusions to things that you already know, to the degree that the text and the teaching can bring in those kinds of experiences. I think it makes it more coherent. And by the way, one of the reasons that kids like teachers more than they like textbooks is that that's exactly what a good teacher does. A good teacher realizes what's going to be tricky about that text and provides the connections to something that they hope is in more than one of the kids' knowledge domain as a way of building that bridge. But to the degree that we can make our curriculum more coherent in and of itself, we'll be getting kids more engaged in it. The fifth one is funds of knowledge. It's not just, one of the things that we learned from Louise Malle is that everyone brings knowledge to the table, but sometimes the game they play doesn't privilege everyone's knowledge. And if we learn one thing, I think, from Louise Malle, from his funds of knowledge notion, and from Gloria Ladson-Billings with her culturally relevant pedagogy, it's that you got to find connections to everyone's knowledge. There really isn't any choice. You can't just connect to some kids' knowledge, because if you do, the other kids will what? They'll tune out and they won't be engaged. And this, I think, the other thing that we have to do is to realize that having a diversity of knowledge about any given topic in a classroom is really a strength, not a weakness, because the more kids you have, the more likely they are to know different aspects of the topic in question, and therefore the more likely they are to be able to help one another. We are indeed better and smarter together. Well, that's yesterday. Now, did you see anything in there that you think is worth keeping in our repertoire? Yeah. Maybe us old farts aren't so bad after all. Yeah. The older I get, the younger landmarks like 75, which have already passed, and 80 and 85 are. It's really interesting to see that. Today, I want to really talk about a couple of issues they really surround the new standards for English language art. I would say the Common Core, but it doesn't matter if you're in a state that has a Common Core or not, because all the states that don't have the Common Core have, like the Alabama Core or the Tennessee Core, or I don't know what you have in Wyoming. I don't know what you have, but it doesn't matter which core you have. What they all seem to have in common is much higher expectations about the level of text that you can read independently, and much more rigorous expectations about the kinds of text you write. The thing that I see, I don't know about you, but there's a book that Andrea Lunsford wrote several versions of, called Everything's an Argument. And if you look at the Common Core, it looks like that's true. Everything is an argument. Argument and evidence, right? Yeah, you got to have evidence for everything. Well, the good news is that the visions of literacy and teaching that are being portrayed in the Common Core, I think are really great. When I first read the Common Core state standards, I was blown away. The bad news is that the implementation undermines the very goals that those standards aspire to achieve. Here's what they said about reading, right in the preamble to the core. Students who meet the standards readily undertake the close, attentive reading that's at the heart of understanding. Then you got critical reading, and then you got wide, deep, and thoughtful engagement. You're building knowledge, you're enlarging experience, you're broadening world views, you're engaging in coherent reasoning and use of evidence. What's not to like? Those are all the things that I believe we should be aspiring to when we're teaching reading to our kids in our schools. And I thought that's great. That's a good vision of where we want to get kids to. And here's what they said about teacher choice. This is in the standards. I didn't make this up. It's not an alternate fact. By emphasizing required achievements, the standards leave room for teachers, curriculum developers, and states to determine how those goals should be reached and what additional topics should be addressed. Thus, the standards do not mandate such things as a particular writing process or the full range of metacognitive strategies that students may need to monitor and direct their thinking and learning. Teachers are thus free to provide students with whatever tools and knowledge their professional judgment and experience identify as most helpful for meeting the goals set out in the standards. I looked at that and I said, again, what's not to like? It's everything that I believe about how prerogative should be balanced in the body politic in American education. Let the larger body at every level have a voice in let everyone at every level have a voice in the overarching goals. At every level along the way, from the state to the district to the schools to the classroom, leave a little room for everybody to put his or her own signature on the effort. Because identity, buy-in, and the right kind of political negotiation amongst levels within a system like this are exactly how we get curricula to work. And when we don't pay attention to all those things, they usually don't work. Because what teachers do, if you're smart, is you engage in a waiting game, and you take a deep breath and you say, and this too shall pass. Right? And the question was, is that what's being delivered in the Common Core? There's Robbie Burns who said the best laid plans of mice and men will often go awry. There's also an old Roman saying, there's many a slip between cup and lip. And I think in some ways that's what's happening with the standards. I think there are 3 challenges that we're trying to meet desperately, and I think they're in some ways meetable. Will upping the ante in text complexity enable more kids to read more complex text? Because that's one of the big strategies. Can close reading improve comprehension and learning? There's a lot of stuff out there about close reading. And will embedding reading, writing, and language in the disciplines improve learning? And this is, by the way, the essence of my talk, so I've reduced it to one part of this talk. Challenge 1, do students read better and learn more when they experience greater challenge in the text they encounter? You know why we have this problem? We have this problem because the people who advised the Common Core guys, they computed this graph. And here's the graph of the average difficulty of materials that kids read in grades 1 through 12 as measured by the Lexile scale. And then this upper one is where we would need to be if by the time you got out of grade 12, you could read stuff that you're expected to read as a freshman in college, okay? And this gap in between is the gap between where we are and where we would need to be if we wanted kids to be college ready. And by the way, being career ready is about the same level. Most entry-level career manuals and things like that are written at about the same as college freshman level and the like. So the big question for the people who wrote the Common Core is how are we going to get there? How are we going to make up that gap? And that is where we started. I knew I forgot to do this. You see, this is a picture of this guy trying to lift the weight. And I forgot to make these animated, so they're supposed to fly in later on. But now imagine what's behind that. Is this guy trying to lift this weight? And the question is he engaged in productive struggle? And where's the line where productive struggle becomes unproductive, where the weight is just too much and the like? And I think that's really what we're all seeking to find out in trying to do this kind of stuff. Now, I think kids should be able to, I don't think we should be doing this just to sort of up the ante. I do think there are good reasons for having kids capable of reading stuff that's a little out of their range. First is the Michael Rodriguez thing. I think kids should be able to read what they want to read. And a lot of kids can't because they just haven't put together the combination of resources to be able to read challenging material. Second, students should all have strategies that allow them to understand Waterloo texts, at least well enough to get by. And what I mean by a Waterloo text is a text that's capable of bringing you to your knees. Now, if any of you ever went to graduate school and took a statistics course, chances are the statistics text was a Waterloo text. And how are you going to make it through? How are you going to get enough out of that text to pass the course? And the third reason for having some challenging text is that strategies actually make a lot more sense when the text is challenging. If I give you a really simple text, then and ask you to engage in the strategy, say, why in the hell's name am I engaging in this strategy? I already figured out what this text said and meant. Yeah, and the like. So those are, I think, the reasons why productive struggle and and having some diet of challenging text might make sense. But you know, I like the way that Dick Anderson and his colleagues put it in a book called Becoming a Nation of Readers in 1984 or 5. They said every day, every kid should have an opportunity to read some text that's really easy, well within each reader's comfort, competence, and confidence level. Why? So you have an opportunity to consolidate whatever skills you're building in the life in a situation where you can be independent and on your own. They also said that every day, kids should have a chance to read text that's just outside that level of comfort, that level of competence, that level of confidence. Why? So you can flex those strategic muscles that you're acquiring so that you can test how far you can stretch and the like. And I thought, well, and by the way, they said you should always do that second part with teacher guidance, right? And that's sort of an operational definition of the difference between independent level and instructional level as we traditionally thought about it, right? Instructional level is what you can do with little help from your friends. And I think that's probably a good kind of rule of thumb for what we might want to do here. But I don't want to dismiss it altogether. So what's a body to do? Well, I think this is a journey, not a mandate. I think we should offer high levels of diverse scaffolding for that productive struggle. We should rethink the scaffolding metaphor, not whether a kid can read a text at a given level, but under what conditions of support can a student make meaning while reading a text? That's the real question for me. And for some kids, it's going to take more support than others to read the very same text. What scaffolds are available to help kids read just beyond their grasp? I divided it into three categories: reader scaffolds, text scaffolds, and task scaffolds. At the reader scaffold, there's a build and invoke more knowledge. In the long run, you can build it. In the short run, you can invoke relevant knowledge that the kids have. I think some of the strategies we have for clarifying, inferring word meanings, exploiting text structure, and looking for analogies and other connections are all strategies that can be under the control of the reader with a little guidance from you. And I call these reader scaffolds because they're largely inside the head. Nothing is only inside the head, but largely inside the head. For text scaffolds, I think looking for text structure, that problem with text structure is both in the text and in the reader, right? Because if you don't have the knowledge of it, all the examination you're going to do isn't going to help. I think in the future, my new notion of readability is that what makes a text more readable is when writers explain new concepts well, use a lot of analogies, metaphors, and other things to clarify things. And I think those could be interesting text scaffolds too. Activity scaffolds include close reading variations, various visual organizers, summarization tasks. I like paraphrase tasks, they're my favorites. Say it in your own words. Right? And I think all of the stuff that we've learned about in Richard talk about text, how to make our discussions more engaging and deeper in terms of the ideas that we engage kids in, discussions that balance the role of the text and the role of your experience and knowledge, I think what we need. So that's my business about upping the ante. So here's my notion. Will upping the ante in text complexity enable more kids to read complex text? If and only if we learn to provide more and better scaffolding to build those bridges. I think this is where much is expected of kids, much is expected of us. We can't up the ante without providing more assistance than we currently provide. I think it's a cruel joke not to follow through on that promise. Just telling kids to try harder isn't going to do it so. Challenge number 2, can close reading improve students' text comprehension? Well, this is going to be a victim of time and focus I don't have time to cover close reading in all the detail of which it deserves to be covered, because it's a big deal out there. And what I see more and more happening in our schools is more and more teachers being asked to make sure that they spend a lot of time making sure that kids get the literal message that was there on the page. And that's not what anybody ever meant by close reading. Close reading means, to me, that what you're going to do is you're going to interrogate the text, and you're going to use the text as an evidentiary source to figure out what the text says, what the text means, and how the text works. Okay, as well as there's another one too, and that is what the text does. Because texts are not neutral things. Texts often have intentions, and they often sort of travel out into the world and try to influence what we do and how we act and the like. So it's really four. What the text says, that's the literal part. What the text means, that's the interpretive part. How the text works, that's the craft stuff. And the final one is what the text is trying to do, how it's trying to shape us as readers and the like. And so if we had close reading that did those things, I'd be a happy camper. But I'm afraid my biggest fear is that close reading will simply usher in a 1960s version of What Color Was Susie's Dress? This is what I was going to talk about close reading. By the way, do you know that it's a phenomenon of the 20s? And you know why it started in literature? It started because a bunch of literary critics got confused by all the new Freudian stuff and historicism in literature that nobody was dealing with the text. All they were dealing with was the background and the traumas of the authors. And my favorite quote from, I think this one is either from Essen or it might have been from Clement Brooks. Knowing what Keats had for breakfast won't help you understand Ode to a Grecian Urn. Right? So the attempt was to get back that to look more closely at the text. But it's also, Louise Rosenblatt talked about close reading. So we know it can't just be in the text because Louise Rosenblatt is all about interpretation. And even Derrida and others read the text closely because they want to read through the text to its underlying assumptions and the like. So you find close reading in all different literary traditions. But this is what you find in the publisher's guidelines of that emerged from the Common Core Standards. Materials make the text the focus of instruction by avoiding features that distract from text. Publishers should be extremely pairing and offering activities that are not text-based, whatever that means. And this is, for those of you speed readers, that's what I was going to say. But I do want to focus on this for a second. So why has prior knowledge taken such a lead in this? It's like you shouldn't ever deal with prior knowledge. And the thing that I don't understand about that is that nobody can understand any text without invoking prior knowledge. You won't know if you've understood it until you can make those connections, right? That I was talking about. Does it jive with your knowledge? Does it jive with other parts of the text? I think that the writers did too many visits to schools where they saw too much picture walk, too much story swapping about our experience with Roadrunners before we were reading, a half hour discussing Roadrunners and 3 minutes left for the text. But if that's the problem, let's right those wrongs. Let's make a mid-course correction. Let's not throw the prior knowledge baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. Asking kids to hold their prior knowledge at bay is like asking dogs not to bark and leaves not to fall. It's in the nature of things. Dogs bark, leaves fall. Readers use their prior knowledge to render a text sensible and to figure out what to retain from later. You just can't do it any other way. So will close reading help to improve reading comprehension? I think it's a good addition, a good correction to give more credence to the text. But as long as we remember that the goal is to use the text as a resource to deal with what the text says, what it means, how it works, and what it's trying to do. And that's the real goal for all comprehension. Challenge 3. are reading and writing best developed and enacted in the service of acquiring disciplinary expertise. You know, this has been the big discovery for me. I want a campaign to minimize the distinction between reading to learn and learning to read. I think we're always reading to learn. I think that's why we have secondary programs. I think we're always reading to learn. That's why texts for even our youngest readers must promote knowledge and insight about the human condition. I think reading, writing, and language are best conceptualized as tools, not goals. And I think most of the mischief in reading gets done, and maybe writing, I'm not so sure about writing, when literacy becomes the goals and not the means of the curriculum. That is when we take on phonics for phonics' sake, or spelling patterns for spelling patterns' sakes, or fluency for fluency's sake. Those things are the means that get us to comprehension. We've always got to keep our eye on the prize, and the prize is understanding about understanding and insight about the human condition. Our current views of curriculum sort of look like this. We try to have a silo for each area. By the way, I hope you appreciate how hard it was to find a picture with 4 silos. But I think it's just a beautiful metaphor for high school curriculum, and unfortunately also elementary, because we don't travel much across those subject matter boundaries when we shift from one to the other. I like a model like this. I like to think that there are these disciplines, science, social studies, math, and I'm adding literature to it. The reason I'm adding literature to it is I think literature is more like a discipline because it has its own subject matter. It's the stuff of human experience, right? Life, death, love, hate, friendship, betrayal, all those kinds of things. And then I'd like to regard reading, writing, and language as the tools that enable us to understand, remember, and learn from those experiences that we have within the disciplines. I really like the weaving metaphor better. Someone talked about that, and I tried to use my PowerPoint skills to make it, but it didn't work so well. So I decided that I would get another picture. And so this is the work on the left of balloon. And the idea is that, you know, we're weaving together these tools with the stuff of these disciplines, and we're creating, you know, a finished product that has the strength of a woven fabric. That's what our goal is. Quick illustration. This comes from the work I do in science and literacy. This is we conceptualize our vocabulary instruction that we do as entailing reading, writing, and language. And we also include activity. So our mantra is read it, write it, talk it, do it. And we think that anything that's worth learning is worth learning in those 4 modalities. And when you work in all 4 modalities, you dramatically increase the likelihood that kids will learn and remember something. So you got here, like if you got a word, you can deal with it as a thing to recognize, as a thing to define, as an entity that is related to a lot of other things. That's the habitat and that semantic map up there, right there. You can deal with it in a textual context, and you can experience it there. Whoops. You can also deal with it in an application when you're doing something. You're building an aquarium and you use the word habitat to talk about what it is you're building and what it is you hope it does for animals. And you can also use that word when you're doing a synthesis, perhaps in writing, of what you learned in that unit. And the whole idea here is that meeting a word in all those different contexts actually increases the likelihood that you will learn and remember it. And by the way, we don't think of our vocabulary in our work as any different from the knowledge that we're helping kids acquire. We like to think that as kids are acquiring knowledge, they're also acquiring labels to name their knowledge. So this is 2 weeks worth of curriculum I'm showing you in 30 seconds here. This is for the habitat. There are organisms, and these are plants that things that live in a habitat, and we deal with experiences of helping learn what a habitat is, and then we say that in this habitat you would have both behavioral and structural adaptations that allow you to live in that habitat. Root is one kind of structural adaptation that a plant has that helps it gather nutrients from the soil through the decomposers that act upon the organic matter and transform it into a medium that allows the roots to take it to the plant and the habitat that it lives. But my point is that when we encounter all this vocabulary, we encounter it in that read it, write it, talk it to it. Kids encounter it in the text they read and the writing they do, in the language we use to talk about the activity and the actual activity itself. So, our notion is that when you teach words in this way, you have repeated opportunities for exposure and practice. You teach words and networks of related concepts. You teach words through text, talk, and experience. Read it, write it, talk it, do it. And that's our way of trying to sort of integrate these different the different tools of language across content and language. By the way, integration is tough. You ever see what happens when you try to integrate reading and math? This is the evolution of math story problems over the last 40 years. Looks like this. In the 1960s, you get a story problem that looked like that. Recognize that? Some of us were unlucky enough to teach in the late 60s and early 70s where we had the new math. And we were supposed to talk to kids in language like this. This was learning to do math like a mathematician. Now, that didn't last long because along came New Age, society and culture and the like, and we get the 80s version of the math story problem. and then in the 90s, you remember the 90s we had whole language, embedded spelling, and critical literacy. And And then came along No Child Left Behind, and the math story problem looked like this. I think our colleagues in math deserve decodable math story problems, don't you? Yeah. Now, you're the first audience that's ever seen this next one. I decided to ask myself, what would this look like in the era of challenging text and argument-based writing? Here's what it looks like. I worked really hard on the quinoa. It was going to be either quinoa, farro, or kale. So our reading and writing best developed and enacted in the service of acquired disciplinary literacy. I'm really enthralled with this approach, as long as we think of literature as a discipline, because I think it deserves to, and secondly, it doesn't situate reading, writing, and language inside literature. The problem in middle and high school is that other subject matter teachers think of reading, writing, and language as the territory of the English language arts teacher. And we've got to get over that by helping them understand that it's to their advantage to situate those tools within their own. It can reduce the mischief associated with regarding reading, writing, and language as ends unto themselves. Their worth is measured by their consequences, and the consequences are insight knowledge, joy, and communication. In short, all the things we get for being human. And that's really why I like this approach. tomorrow. Can I have a couple, Cindy, my time is up. Is it okay to take a couple more minutes? I wouldn't want to leave here without dealing with tomorrow. I got 3 problems that I want us to deal with. One is accountability and assessment. I know it's been a problem in the past, but it's still a problem. And it's still a problem tomorrow. We haven't cracked that nut. I also want to deal with poverty and the achievement gap because, you know, one of the first talks I went to as a 5th grade teacher in Porterville, California was about how to eradicate the achievement gap. That was 1964. We're still trying to eradicate it. And you know what's significant about 64? Is that was it that year or the next year that Johnson got the war on poverty started? Yeah, 64. Yeah. Accountability and assessment. When you took your first poli-sci course in college, you learned that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. There's a corollary in assessment. Stakes corrupt, and high stakes corrupt in a big, big way. When the stakes are high, we become, as a profession, desperate. We teach to the test, we pack to the portfolio, we focus on the project at all costs, and we lose our perspective on what really matters. The problem is that we've got a horse cart problem. It's probably one of those horse. It's a horse cart. And that is, we got the assessment thing is doing the driving, not the curriculum. You should have an assessment that helps you to achieve your curricular goals, not a curriculum that helps you achieve your assessment goals. The worst case scenario you can have is when you have high stakes and you have a test that puts the bar low. Because you know what will happen? It'll drive the curriculum down to that least common denominator. It's almost inevitable. So that's, my first bumper sticker is that. Don't do that. My second bumper sticker is this. It's exactly what we do. It's exactly what we do. And we shouldn't be doing it. Because no test can meet that challenge. The test that can be a curriculum was never built. It doesn't have the complexity or the capacity for complexity in it. There are several potential solutions to this problem. Just say no, don't send a test out to do the curriculum job. We're going to have tests, we're going to teach to test, let's have tests we're teaching to. That sounds good in principle, but it simply keeps the cart and the horse in the same relative position. We could weaken the link between assessment and instruction. This is an answer that I'd like to pursue, but it's hard. It's hard to do that because we are so driven to improve our scores on these tests, it's hard to imagine doing that. By the way, I'm looking for a school or a district or someone who's willing to take on this challenge right here. The best way to prepare for a test is to provide a rich, challenging curriculum for all students. Have a curriculum that's so good that it doesn't matter what test you put in front of them, the kids will be able to do it. And the last one is build coherent assessment systems that don't ask tests to do things they can't do. If I were betting, I'd bet on that one, because I think it's possible. The others, I think, would require so much political capital and political change that I'm not sure that it's possible. When I work with a school district, one of the first things I do is this. I literally do this. We do it collectively as an exercise. We make a chart. And it looks like this. We put the clients down the side. And if people don't do it voluntarily, I make them put the student first. Because the student should be the first client of the assessment system. And then I get people to generate, well, what kinds of decisions do these people have to make, or what kind of questions do they have to answer? And we put that down. And then we look at our available tools, and we ask ourselves, what tools do we have available to help us answer those questions? By the way, as long as we're mentioning stealing things from people, I borrowed this from a friend of Tabby's and mine, Karen Wixon, when we were in Michigan. This is I learned this from Karen and doing workshops. And this is an incredibly productive activity because it makes people think about the evidence that they already have. People are always saying, we don't have anything to assess that. Well, you do if you have a broad enough notion of what counts as assessment, including classroom assessments and the like. And we don't have time to go through it, but I encourage you to do it as a school or a district because I think you'll develop a lot of insights. The big purposes for assessment are always program evaluation, how are we doing as a school, monitoring progress, are our kids making progress on tasks we care about along the way. This is like the dipstick or the thermometer measure. We just want to know if you're on the right track. Third one that everybody talks about but nobody does enough about is formative assessment. And this is using everyday evidence as a grist for instructional decision making that leads to responsive teaching. That is, once you learned how kids are doing, you make a change in what you're doing. And then I actually wish we hadn't called it formative assessment. I wish we called it formative teaching, because the end result of the assessment is in some kind of new instructional plan. And then we have diagnostic assessments, digging deeper into the infrastructure to better understand performance and motivation. And my rule of thumb is this: don't ask the test to serve a function that it wasn't validated for. I'll give you my favorite example. Dibbles. Dibbles was validated as a progress monitoring tool. If you go to the website and look to see what it says it'll do, it says it'll monitor kids' progress. It never said it's a good diagnostic tool. It never said it'll evaluate the infrastructure of kids, the range of skills they need to be a good reader. It just said it'll monitor progress. Well, what's wrong? Everybody uses it as a diagnostic tool, evidenced by the fact that if kids have a low score on how fast they can name phonemes, we have them practice naming phonemes faster. Or if they don't recall enough words from a story in a minute, we have them practice that. But never ask a test to do something that it wasn't intended to and isn't validated for. A simple thing that I often do with teachers in the area of the Common Core is we put these are my shorthand for the Common Core standards, the 9 reading ones, and we put tests that we have available to us along the side, and we say, where can we get the evidence? And in the richer version of this, we would actually put in sentences rather than check marks and talk about the kind of evidence that we can get. But reading closely, I can get that all over the place, right? Central ideas, I can get that all over the place. You just go on, and you find out that with locally made performance tasks, even units that you develop for social studies or science, there's all kinds of opportunity to get that evidence. And then everyday assignments too, and the like. So the point is that, buying your local resources for stuff you can do. And then finally, take formative assessment seriously. It's a good tool, just take it seriously. So, by the way, real quickly, I won't go. I do encourage you to do performance assessments, but then you've got to live with them, right? So here are some of the answers that kids gave to science performance assessments. Cindy told me she has some oxygen waiting for you. This is a kid who's trying to write science in a literary genre. And finally, well, no, that's the big one. Real quickly, poverty and the achievement gap. This is an exhortation, not an explanation. This is what we want to have happen. We want the gap between the haves and the have-nots to close over time, not because the top went down, but because the bottom went up, okay? You can close the achievement gap just by stopping teaching the high achievers, right? In order to do that, we are going to have good curriculum and assessment tools. There's no question about that. We're also going to have quality teaching and PD, the likes of which we've never seen. But we're also going to have healthcare and nutrition. And those of you who work with children in poverty know that some days they come to school and you wonder how they do anything at all given the level of nutrition that they're coming with. We're also going to have employment opportunities. Poverty is the biggest explanation of the achievement gap. It's the driver of everything. And until and unless that gets addressed in a broader social reform, it's not something that we won't solve this achievement gap problem on our own as educators. The society at large has to do it. And we also have to have this commitment that everybody's knowledge comes to the table. That has to be there too. And I guess my lesson from this is that it takes a society to eliminate the achievement gap. We'll do our part, but other people have to do their parts too. Lee can tell you about all this when you come to a talk that she gives, but she knows a lot more about this than I do. I just know that reading in a digital environment brings something old. There are still words there, and there are still knowledge to connect to and the like. It brings a lot of new affordances that are really cool in terms of media. That's like multimedia, only it's spelled different. Hypermedia, images and formats galore, and scaffolding. Something challenging. This to me is the biggest challenge. The internet is the biggest democracy of information ever invented. And that means we have to double down on technical literacy. Kids need to deal with the validity and reliability of sources and their relevance and the like. It's never been more important. It's twice as important as it was in a print culture. Something true cries out for evidence-based oral and written argumentation. There's just the amount and the nature of the evidence that you can collect in a millisecond is just mind-boggling. But you can't just do that. You also have to evaluate the relevance and validity of the information. This is a challenge I'm ready to come for. I hope you are too. It's going to be interesting. Final point, we need a new kind of accountability. This is one kind of accountability. It's an accountability we're used to, and it's one that we know the answers to. When we enforce this kind of accountability, we get winners and losers, and we don't achieve the goals we'd like to achieve. There is a higher accountability, of course, and that's not to tests, but to the students and their families. And as we fulfill that responsibility, we need to remember that kids are who they are. They know what they know. They bring what they bring. Instead of regarding what students bring to the classroom as an instructional inconvenience, our job as teachers is to transform both the individual and the collective intellectual and cultural resources they bring into curricular opportunities that will support everyone's learning. That to me is the real challenge of teaching. No goal can be more important for teachers and for all of us who aspire to make a difference in the lives of students and their families. No accomplishment can be more important for the field of literacy education or its leading professional organizations. I want to thank you for being the committed teachers you are. I want to thank you for caring about the kids who depend on schools to learn how to read. I want to thank you for sharing the evening with me. God bless you. Next, we have folks from the Writing Project, and they're going to introduce their topic and tell us all the wonderful things it does. You know, I'm a real big fan of the National Writing Project. Yeah. I was on the board of directors of it for 4 years.
teachers Tia Frahm, Amy Spiker, who is also a co-director, and Tiffany Rabine on the leadership team there in Austin, Texas right now, representing Wyoming Writing Project at the Teach to Lead Summit. And so, the core beliefs of the Wyoming Writing Project is that all teachers are writers and teachers of writing. Students are at the core of or the center of our work. Writing is important, authentic, and interdisciplinary. Ongoing professional development is necessary. Teachers can and should be the voice of change, or a voice for change. And so one way we support these beliefs is through our Invitational Leadership Institute, which is a 3-week intensive writing professional development for teachers across the state of Wyoming. And so we are here tonight to recognize those teachers who have successfully completed the Invitational Leadership Institute and who are now teacher consultants for the National Writing Project. And so these teachers are ready to present their professional development and their action research projects that were related to an area of writing across the content, across grade levels and content. So as their name and inquiry projects are announced, we'd like them to come to get their certificates. So joining us are Brandy Dearcorn, she's a 5th grade teacher in Basin, and her inquiry was how can graphic organizers help students bridge the gap between reading and writing in history class? She's a retired teacher from Sheridan, and her inquiry is social media's role in educational organizations. We have Bailey Jackson. She's a high school English teacher in Powell, and her inquiry is using social media to increase writing motivation and engagement. And Winnie Chalk is a 6th grade teacher in Gillette, and her inquiry is all about mental texts. We have 4 teacher consultants who are unavailable this evening, and so we're just going to honor them. So Daniel Pomerane, high school English teacher in Laramie, and his inquiry was publishing student work in a high school journalism class. Danielle Wood is a middle school English teacher here in Laramie, and her inquiry was making writing a positive experience. And then Jane Nimatello, secondary English in Cairo, Egypt, with her inquiry, English language learners and the writing teacher. And Anna Humans, who's a librarian in Laramie, with her inquiry of digital writer's notebooks. So this summer, our teacher consultants reached out to and taught professional development to more than 50 teachers in Wheatland and Evanston and Laramie. They will also lead our fall book study on disrupting thinking, why how we read matters. And there's a few copies for sale out there as well. And if you have any questions about the work of the Wyoming Writing Project, we invite you to talk to any of us during the conference. Join us tomorrow morning at 9:40 in room 215, or we have an information table in the hallway. So thank you and enjoy the conference.
Our 4 fabulous children's book authors that are here with us this evening. We have with us Molly Bang, Eugene Galliano, Louise Jackson, and Tim Rush. I'm going to tell you a little bit about each one of them, and then you will have the opportunity. They each have a table in the back with their books on display. You can purchase a book, you can meet the authors, you can talk to the authors, they'll sign a book for you. If you're interested in purchasing a book, you just need to take one and then hop out the door right into the hallway, which is where they will be accepting payment. So, a little bit about our authors. Molly Bang is a 3-time Caldecott Honor winner. She's written and illustrated more than 20 books for young readers, and she is well known for her interest in the natural world and her advocacy for environmental issues. Her most recent book, Living Sunlight, How Plants Bring the Earth to Life, is a poetic exploration of the universal energy force within us all. And her book, Common Ground, won, and I don't know if I'm going to say this quite right, the Giverny, not sure how to say that, award for Best Science Picture Book. We also have with us tonight Eugene Galliano. Eugene is a retired Wyoming elementary school teacher, and he is the current Wyoming State Poet Laureate, so make sure you talk to him. He has won numerous awards for his writing, and some of these are IRA's 2004 Wyoming State Celebrate Literacy Award, the 2001 Arch Cole Teacher Achievement Award, and the 2010-2011 Wyoming State Historical Society Award for Best Fiction. Next we have Louise Jackson. She's the author of 5 books. And Louise was a professor in the College of Education here at the University of Wyoming. She was the winner of the 2008 WILA Literacy Award for the Best Children's Young Adult Novel of the Women's West, published in 2007. She has written widely for teachers, and she has published in the Reading Teacher and Language Arts. And then finally we have Tim Rush. Tim is a professor emeritus at the University of Wyoming. He has focused on the preparation of teachers of American Indian culture, American Indian children, culturally relevant American Indian education, indigenous culture, and language preservation and occupational literacy. In 2009, the International Reading Association recognized him with the Jerry Johns Outstanding Teacher, Educator in Reading Award. And with Tim is his publisher, Trish O'Hare. And Trish is Executive Director and Publisher of Gemma Open Door for Literacy, a nonprofit organization devoted to literacy for all. Trish has more than 30 years senior experience across trade, academic, and professional publishing, and has spent a decade running Gemma Media, which first published Open Doors in America. As a volunteer literacy teacher at Rosie's Place, a sanctuary for poor and homeless women in Boston, her classroom experience with low literacy and English as a second language students informs and guides the program. So, please stay. There's more food, I think, in the back. The authors are here, their books are here. Doors open tomorrow morning at 7:30 for continental breakfast, which will be from 7:30 to 8:30 right here. So if we don't see you tonight, we will see you tomorrow morning. Thank you. Have a good evening.